Thank you all for those who are still here. We appreciate the commitment. These are very obviously important goals that we're all striving for, and we want to be awake for this last session. So just for 2 seconds, let's all stand up, and if there's someone that you see beside you that you haven't met before, shake their hand, introduce yourself, but let's all give ourselves a stretch. All right? This is just something of inspiration.
Are we trying to go to the end of the hour, or are we going to...
We'll wrap up before the end of the hour.
Yeah.
Do your part. You do your part.
And then I'll let you...
Wrap it up.
Maybe 40, 45 minutes of
Kill me.
And then I'd like to take some questions.
Right.
Put them down because
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
want. Let's leave because they're tired.
Yeah, I'll let you go first. Okay. Okay, now you're having too much fun. So you can all sit back down. Thank you very much. Promise we'll let you go shortly. I feel a bit like a conductor now. You can all... created a monster.
I want the monster back.
Okay, thank you everyone. If you could please return to your seats, and we will start with Ewan Harvey from the NASDAQ. So thank you, everyone. We will start with Evan Harvey from NASDAQ. Evan?
Thanks very much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for staying to the bitter end. I just want to take a few minutes to recap a little bit of what I've heard today and to talk about some of the more inspirational things that I've seen in the circles in which I operate, some of which have been already mentioned, some of which might be new to you. So I am the Global Head of Sustainability for NASDAQ. We operate markets in Europe and mostly prominently in the US. I'm a member of the Network USA board for the Global Compact, the UN Global Compact. I'm a member of the Global Sustainability Standards Board at the GRI. I'm tied to that organization through that vehicle. And then I'm a participant in a lot of other sort of executive bodies and panels and working groups. So all of these groups, all the circles that I run in are grappling with the SDGs, trying to understand the goals, to measure impact, to demonstrate progress, and to make progress more palatable and more inevitable. So I'll talk first about stock exchanges because that's where the bulk of my experience lies. For those of you who don't know, there's a significant working group globally called the UN Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. It's been around since 2009. It was co-founded by UNCTAD, UNGC, UNEP-FI, and PRI, a lot of different parts in the financial markets ecosystem. And it's made up, it's meant to be a best practices and information sharing body for exchanges, regulators, investors, and listed companies. So right now that group has 64 of the 80 largest stock exchanges on the planet as members. So that's about 80% of all the stock exchanges in the world. It's closer to 90% if you look at the number of listed companies and market cap. So it's a significant majority of the capital market world. And what are we doing specifically with the SDGs? Well, when we looked at the SDGs, obviously this group predates the launch of the SDGs, but we looked at 4 particular SDGs that we thought that we could drive progress on: gender equality, sustainability info, climate change, and global partnerships. How do we do this? What is the way that we support these SDGs? So first and foremost, a lot of exchanges are engaged in ESG reporting guidance, helping to assist companies by providing our best view, our best guess, our consensus recommendation on the kinds of metrics that are demonstrating progress towards sustainability goals in general and the SDGs in particular. We published, NASDAQ, meaning we published our ESG reporting guide for the European markets in March. The US version is coming later this year. It covers 33 metrics across the ESG spectrum, almost all of which are correlated to the SDGs. In fact, we're working with the UN Global Compact to create an official concordance between our recommendation and theirs. So we talk about harmonization and trying to find a single source for all of these different data points. We're very cognizant of the fact that companies feel a little bit confused by the landscape, and there are so many competing and overlapping frameworks. But in addition to creating reporting standards and guidance, we engage in dialogue. We create sustainability products, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Listing requirements. Some exchanges have gone beyond the voluntary realm and into a listing requirement, meaning you do not have access to that market or those investors unless you disclose some environmental, social, and governance information. And then, of course, facilitating global partnerships. Exchanges are sort of uniquely positioned between regulators and companies and markets to create this dialogue around why sustainability data matters, almost as much, if not more so, than the traditional financial reporting data. There is another industry working group that I won't take your time with now through our trade association, the World Federation of Exchanges, called the Sustainability Working Group. We created it and we chaired it, but essentially their goals are the same as the UN Working Group. And there's an explicit underpinning action that we identify in the SSC, and that is mobilizing finance. How can exchanges drive capital into more sustainable directions? That's where we really have some leverage, and that's where we can do the most good. And we do that in 3 ways: innovating and supporting sustainability-related indexes, bonds, and other products, encouraging long-term sustainable investment, and then helping nascent exchanges, emerging economies, promote mature support domestic mobilization of capital. We do that, NASDAQ, by exporting market technology. We provide the underpinning technology for a lot of the markets, the stock exchanges in the world, but also just creating a better practice and set of expectations for the exchange industry in general. What is the standard MO for how exchanges expect companies to behave and what the reporting burden is for companies back to the exchanges? So in terms of financial instrumentation, there's not a whole lot to report here. A lot of what is out there you have probably heard of. I mean, there's the MSCI Sustainable Impact Index, iShares MSCI Global Impact ETF that basically make explicit reference to the SDGs in particular, or they include SDG impacts in their methodology. And then there's also the Sole Active SDG World Index, which is driving like the World Bank Green Bond Initiative. But then we also, NASDAQ has a CRD Global Sustainability Index that pays tribute to the SDGs. Credit Suisse came up with an LGBT index, a very lightweight and interesting instrument based on what HRC was doing. And then we've got the Dow Jones Sustainability Index and FTSE for Good. So there are some financial products out there that are trying to drive capital into directions, companies, passively or actively, that are moving the needle on this kind of goals that the SDGs are trying to deliver. But mostly what I want to talk about today is what companies are doing. I mean, I interact with companies, NASDAQ-listed companies, all the time, helping them to improve their performance, helping them to engage in a deeper and more meaningful conversation with investors in particular about how their long-term goals mesh with long-term investment goals. And sustainability is really the area of the greatest overlap there. So I'm just going to highlight a few. These are not necessarily the greatest or the best, they're the ones that came to mind when they asked me to come. So Intel, often cited as an exemplar in the electronics industry, they created a 66-page action plan after the publication of the SDGs called the Sustainable Development Goals ICT Playbook. And it basically goes into a great deal of detail about how and why Intel's investments in information and communication technology are directly tied to SDG targets and delivering progress on SDGs. Microsoft was a lead sponsor of a report called System Transformation, came up with a lot of interesting conclusions about business interaction on SDGs. The business upside, that report identified better access to education for 450 million people, unlocking $9 trillion in global economic benefits, enabling potentially a 20% cut in global CO2 emissions, which of course has dollar impacts. So they looked at it with a business lens. How does this help our business survive? How does this help our business compete well into the future? And they found a number of business drivers behind just contributing to SDG targets. Walgreens, not to just focus on technology, Walgreens, pharmacy chain, they take a fairly standard corporate approach to SDGs, one that we've seen in a lot of different companies, especially at the large cap side. A 5-point plan that includes reviewing and understanding what the SDG goals and targets are, figuring out how to embed those SDGs into corporate goals, public and private and internal, integrating the SDGs into existing corporate activities, which happens much more so than creating new and innovative ones, something we could talk about a little bit later. communicating their progress and engaging with staff and customers and measuring and reporting progress. Something we haven't talked about too much here today is how valuable this communication about progress and commitment to the SDGs is internally in the companies. It helps you recruit and retain staff. It helps attract people to your company. It helps nowadays with the talent pool gravitating to a lower age, you tend to forget the fact that they want to live their values at work, and these younger workers are increasingly willing to change companies if they feel like the company is being inauthentic or not performing on a certain metric. CA Technologies, they put the SDG analysis in page 2 of their sustainability report right after the CEO letter. That gives you an idea of how important they think it is. They've identified primary SDGs that they're focused on. They're quality education, gender equality, clean energy, climate action, partnerships. Novozymes, a biotech, a $12 billion biotech based in Copenhagen, not to just feature American companies, they use the SDGs to actually direct product creation. Their mission statement says, the SDGs have guided the development of our long-term targets for fulfilling company stated purpose of finding biological answers for better lives in our growing world. A pretty clear signal to investors that everything they're doing and everything they're developing in terms of attacking the SDGs has a business impact. And then I just want to close in terms of my company portion on something that I thought was pretty inspirational and very, very local. The Hotel Barclay International, which is not a NASDAQ-listed company, it's here across town. I don't know if you know of it. I had the pleasure of meeting with them last year, a friend of a friend, and I met the general manager there, a delightful man named Hervé Houdre. And he told me that when he heard about, he was not under a corporate obligation to deliver on the SDGs. He is just, a general manager of one hotel in a very large chain. And he was so taken by the mission and the sense of purpose that the SDGs provided that he said, we're going to look at every one of the SDGs and find something in our hotel that delivers progress on them, which I thought was pretty clever. And I just talked about a lot of very large companies that are picking 4, picking 5. They're looking at the things that have the most impact and intersection with their business. Here's a hotel in New York City, which is a tiny little ecosystem like a corporate campus or a hospital, so it has a lot of different business tasks related to it. But they basically said, we're going to look at every single SDG and we're going to do something on every one of them and we're going to report it every year. So you can look at their website and figure it out. I won't go through all of them, but I mean, things like Zero Hunger, SDG 2, they take all their non-served food from all their events and they donate it to City Harvest, which is a food bank here in the city. Quality education, they offered free space for educational programs and lectures there at the hotel. Clean water and sanitation, my favorite. Not only did they add water bottles for guests and made filtered water a default choice, they make their own gin. I mean, they actually are eliminating some of the production problems and creating their own supply for things that they need. So I won't go into all of it, but I thought it was really inspirational for me to see what one company has chosen to do based on a sense of purpose and mission. There's no financial incentive for them to do this. I mean, I think writ large there is a financial incentive for them to do this, but they weren't pressured by customers and they weren't pressured by corporate to do this. All right, so that's great, and the inspirational person will probably stop there, but I have to go on. I want to talk about some of the ways where we're falling short, and I just want to bring back to the surface some of the things I've heard here today and some of the things that I believe. Where are we still requiring progress? What are some of the challenges that we can take up based on this meeting? First and foremost, small and medium enterprise engagement and disclosure. Environmentally, this may not be as urgent. I don't know if you saw the study the other day. It said 100 companies are the source for 70% of our carbon emissions. But socially, we know that small and medium enterprises drive job growth, and they employ half or more of all workers. So we need them on board. We need to find ways to engage with them that make sense. Supply chain transparency. EcoVadis is doing a wonderful job. SPLC is doing a wonderful job. But getting companies of all sizes to acknowledge their responsibility for supplier conduct, compel suppliers to report and perform on SDGs, it's still a rarity. The supply chain, I think, is a vital driver in SDG achievement. It's one of the most effective ways we can engage the SMEs I talked about in point 1. Financial product innovation. I read a few of the indexes and things that are out there, but there's not much really that's tied explicitly to SDG performance right now. Investors and consumers for these products have been largely apathetic. There hasn't been a tidal wave of investment interest. I think that there's more innovation that can be done in products and services, in training and education for companies that are trying to do a better job with these. And then I think we also need more market return analysis. If we're going to make the case that you are going to get an average or a better than market return by investing in some of these things, we need to have the evidence to back that up. Companies are very reluctant to do anything that puts their cost at a premium. Finally, and here's the inspirational part, I I think we can all do more to create a sense of mission related to the SDGs. Just think about what Hervé from the Barclay Hotel did and has done for the last couple of years. He's not running away from crisis. He's not begrudgingly fighting the negative consequences of global apathy. He's embracing the positive future that the SDG actions can create. The SDGs force us to think about shared responsibilities, collective burdens that we all bear. It's not ambition, it's necessity, in my opinion. Natural preservation, shared abundance, economic inclusion, social and political equality. Let's not run away from a future where these are challenges. Let's run towards a better one where they are commonplace.
Thank you. I have the pleasure of following Evan. So inspirational, I've lost my place. So, look, I just want to thank everybody again. On behalf of EcoVadis, we were terribly excited when this opportunity arose that we could work with the UN to be able to bring together really thought leaders, business leaders, political leaders in your respective fields. It's unfortunate that we've had a few people who sort of drop bombs and leave. There was, an amazing statement said right at the beginning from a gentleman from Belgium who soon took off. And we were kicked off this morning by very inspirational speakers who didn't stick around for long either. So I guess what I'd like to do is just touch on some of the things that personally I've learned, and maybe just give you some insight into how everyday news is Sustainable Development Goal news. So recently I had the pleasure of dining in Manhattan, or eating food off the street, I think is another way you can put it, over a lunch break, and stumbled upon The Economist, who had this a neat way of selling magazine subscriptions. They set up a food cart and give you free food, which worked perfectly for me. I ended up leaving with a subscription and a pen and a pad. They were giving away a meat alternative burger, and then on the side of the food cart was all of the information about the climate change impact that meat has on a global scale, and started a dialogue, with the consumer, with the person trying the food, about why they should maybe look at some meat alternatives. So I thought that was really cool, and that got me thinking, what else is out there that is about sustainability, but maybe your peers or your employees or your suppliers don't understand or don't make that connection. And as much as I'm supposed to be inspirational, I do want to just bring back why what we're talking about today is critical to the future of our globe. So I don't know if you got the BBC News alert. I got it this morning. The Chinese Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo, who was jailed for his democracy work, died in prison at the age of 61. And that touches on SDG 16, right? Justice. Yesterday, a chunk of ice the size of Delaware broke off the side of the Antarctic, right? Which is now hurtling towards us and bound to cause more climate change impacts. And that touches on SDG 13. And sometimes, when you live in North America, you think that the companies here have it right. You look to some of those Silicon Valley companies where I'm based in California. But right now, there's a major technology company in California that's completing construction on an enormous futuristic campus for all of their staff that doesn't have any facilities for childcare. Think about that. That's SDG 5, right? That's SDG 10. So, to bring it back to something more upbeat, when you go back to your organization, remember that money can't change anything. I think Tonya here has mentioned it's about people, right? It's about lifelong learning, which just happens to have an SDG. It's number 4. go back, tell your staff, engage, translate. You know, it sometimes feels like we're speaking a different language in our bubble. And then we turn around and the president's changed and we wonder what happened, you know. Translate. You know, be the one that explains it. Because if you don't, you know, who will, right? So economics can't solve the problem, but changing cultural norms can. And that's why I wish the guy from Belgium was still here. Because what he's talking about is cultural norms. You know, maybe right now in Belgium, it's frowned upon to smoke cigarettes, right? In other parts of the world, it's a cultural norm. So the least you can do is ensure that that enormous tobacco company is treating their workers correctly, you know. And then as Joffrey put it, start working with that tobacco company and say, hey, look, you know, your time is numbered. Oil and gas, they get it. You know, I'm in California right now. The commercials on the television are showing oil and gas talking about different types of renewable energy. They're talking about algae to create a new type of fuel that burns less emissions and so on. So it can't be a us versus them, because otherwise we're back in our bubble. We need to communicate. We need to translate, and you know, let's be the translators for all of our businesses and to drive the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Thank you, these two gentlemen. My name is Patricia Chavez. I work for the department, for the Division for Sustainable Development here in New York. And it has been an amazing partnership between Department of the United Nations, a private organization or company like EcoVadis. We have also another entity of the UN, UNITAR, the United Nations Training and Research Institute. And we have another entity, the SDG Fund, that the four of us together came and wanted to offer you kind of an opportunity to speak about the SDGs, to speak about your experiences, the progress or challenges that this has been doing. So while we wrap up this workshop, I want to give you a 30-second elevator speech on what is happening next year and how this workshop may not be just one-off event, but we can continue this conversation over a year. And if you want to participate in that kind of pilot initiative to continue this conversation and learn from each other, this will be the opportunity to do. Because next year, the HLPF is going to session again in July. It's going to be here in New York. Usually happens the second week of July, second and third week of July. Next year, the theme of the HLPF, looking a little bit forward, is transformation towards sustainable and resilient societies. Transformation towards sustainable and resilient societies. And in that particular theme, we're going to see we're going to study 5 SDGs as we did this session, but very pertinent to the private sector and very pertinent to your market opportunities, which is sustainable water and clean water and sanitation, SDG 6. We have SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy. We have SDG 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. And we have SDG 12, which is responsible consumption and production. And the last one is SDG 15, which is life on land. All these 5 SDGs will have dedicated discussions next year. And if there is any interest or any takeaways from this workshop today, do we want to do something next year as well? Do we want to continue this conversation throughout the year? Come back in July 2018 and report back what all of you that we have been honored and privileged to have you here, what have you done during this year? What your organizations have we done? So on a personal, professional level and financial level, have you done anything? Have you left today inspired and energized? Have you left with creativity and innovation to do more within this year. And if there is interest, please let us know. We are EcoVadis here, UNITAR, SDG Fund, and ourselves. Let us know if you want to continue this conversation and do it again next year and concentrate a little bit more on these 5 SDGs that are going to be taken up in more in-depth discussion. That's at least my commercial from the part of the United Nations, at least UN, DESA, and the Division for Sustainable Development. We may need to leave this room at 6 exactly, but if anybody wants 30 seconds, also elevator speech to wrap it up, I will gladly give you the floor. Yes, ma'am. You press yes.
Good afternoon, colleagues and esteemed companies and so forth. My name is Gail Davis Carter. I am an external partner with the United Nations as with Sustainable Development Goals, World Humanitarian Day, and about 4 other different things I don't need to name. First of all, thank you for the work that you guys are doing. I'll just put this forward. Our group has traveled to about 4 or 5 countries, from Portugal to Thailand to France to Switzerland. And what we did is we went across all the countries, literally from beginning to end in the last 6 months, to show the progress of how the Sustainable Development Goals are actually already playing out, and solutions that we would never think of that are everyday things. And one of the things we found, as an example, a woman from Thailand who's from Udon Thani, Isan, she actually came to this country from being a street vendor, as the gentleman just said, and no education, but has become one of the top vegan chefs in the world with no education, being a street vendor in Thailand. What we can learn from Thailand is that every country has its issues to overcome. But Thailand, everyone is a street vendor practically. And the self-respect of being able to take the vegetables from their homeland and bring it and make it for tourism, which this is a year of tourism. How can we do the same things here? You know, look at, even though it's a framework for street vendors in Thailand, how can we bring that to the United States of people working together for jobs, okay? We have artificial intelligence that's coming in, Amazon that's coming in, about to wipe away jobs. How do we train the people that are here? Like, it takes each one of us, as the gentleman stated earlier. How can we, what companies can we, that is what I put forth to the 3 of you, what can we do? How can we work together? You know, you're sitting there, you have some more knowledge that we don't maybe know how to put into play or apply. Maybe you could share that with us on how we can bring that together, like that small example in Thailand.
Thank you. Let me see if there is any other last minute intervention. If not, Evan or Daniel, if you want to answer that. Yeah, Shireen. Sorry, I know her. Go ahead.
It's my last question. So for corporations, we've seen a lot of guidance on how actually we can report, but it's a bit, for us, a lot of audience have said, we have to actually fill in 400 surveys and reports on actually annual basis. I'm heading sustainability for 11 countries, so imagine how much I have to get the follow-up from different departments. So if you're talking about 2018 and reporting actually, the development of the social development goals, how can you, in an elevator speech, facilitate, the reporting to be a very, very simple report so that it doesn't overwhelm companies, especially in the recession period?
I'll just take a few minutes. I think it absolutely is a problem. The question of harmonization and trying to find a way for these things to be less competitive and less time conflicting is really an issue. So what the stock exchanges have done, what NASDAQ has done, is basically looked at the prevalent reporting frameworks that are out there, CDP, UN Global Compact, GRI, SASB to some extent, and tried to find where the common denominators are across all of them. and basically said, these are the metrics that are prevalent in almost every reporting framework that's out there. If you're going to start from scratch and you're trying to get to a certain level of competence in sustainability reporting, let alone SDG reporting, start with those metrics. We'll pick them up from you and publish them on our website if you want, but it's easy for you to publish them in any other way. If you start with understanding what the bottom line is, the landscape and the floor of the reporting world is, then you can get to be a top performer a lot much quicker. I think one of the issues with the inbound questionnaire request problem is that often questions, very similar questions, asking for very similar data are asked in different ways. There's very little harmonization on calculation methodology. I mean, some people calculate emissions one way, some people calculate another way. So in a lot of cases, we have these conflicting requests for information that are asking for very similar points of data, but they're just not asking for it in the same way. So we're trying our best to sort of eliminate some of that confusion. And I know that the GRI, for example, is reaching out to a number of different organizations to try to create more documentation and harmonization as well.
I think we have the other questions.
Please, go ahead. Transformation towards sustainable and resilient societies. This is a theme that governments have agreed to, that we take up next year at the HLPF 2018. No, it's in July. The HLPF will, from now till 2030, will session in July in New York for 2 weeks. And usually, the dates have not been defined yet, but usually it's the second and the third week of July, the 2 weeks in the middle of the month, again next year. Well, if we don't, I don't know if you want to say a few words or I just wrap it up.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that there was a question that I don't think we answered. I think we successfully segued it. Was just about how we would address, the coming challenges of digitization, artificial intelligence, large-scale big box stores being online, acquiring lots of different companies, and therefore reducing the number of competitive vendors, and so on and so forth. Policy can only do so much. It can move certain levers. Injections of funds can only do so much. It can move certain levers. So I think, again, these are the conversations that we need to be having, and we need to be forward-thinking to say, okay, so the business that I work for, what are we doing to ensure we use local suppliers? What are we doing to ensure that we use small suppliers? What are we doing to ensure that we're keeping our options open and not just going to the biggest box that there is? I don't think we can solve the unemployment that's going to be caused by digitization, but there's always these waves, right, of where we think technology is going to put everyone out of work. We're all going to be replaced by the steam engine, and then something happens and we're not, right? And then the next thing is the computer comes along, and then we're never going to have an accountant again, and what do you know? We still have accountants. So I'm not as concerned about that. What I am concerned about is global compassion. I think that is probably the fundamental challenge that we all face, and it's there within us. We just need to go back and communicate it and put it into the language that we know our fellow human beings understand.
If I may, before we leave, I want to leave a few minutes for you to talk to each other again. Again, we need to leave this room at 6 because there is another event that is coming at 6, and I don't want them to just kick you out of room 6. But give you a little bit of time also to network among yourselves. But I want to really pay tribute to all the moderators, to all the panelists, to you for the amazing questions and dedication to stay here till 6 o'clock. It has been an intense day, but I think I feel that we have learned a lot together. Your feedback on the forms that you have submitted to us is very valuable to see if there are other services and other things that we can do for you. But I really want to pay tribute to all of you and to everybody that made this workshop possible and to dedicate time here. So please give yourselves a round of applause because it really was an amazing day for us. Thank you and wish you well.